Kate Delaney had pictured this moment in her mind 1,000 times, but as she stepped off the plane and took her first breath of familiar air, it felt heavier than she'd imagined. Her eyes, shadowed by the brim of her hat, flicked over the airport lounge, scanning the sea of well-dressed faces rushing from gate to gate, as if she were trying to spot old ghosts. The last time Kate had seen her family, she'd been leaving with little more than a suitcase, a bruised heart, and a tarnished reputation, courtesy of those who swore they had her best interests at heart. 5 years had passed, and the woman returning now was a ghost of the girl who had left, but not even her family knew that. Nor did they know she wasn't coming alone. At her side, holding tightly to her hand, was her son James, a silent, sharp-eyed child of 4, and a few steps behind them, her daughter Lila, 6 years old, and already a mirror of her mother's unyielding gaze. She glanced at her children, her heart swelling with the silent, steady resolve that had grown inside her in the years away. They were the reason she had come back. That and the matter of unfinished business. The Delaney family empire, her birthright, lay in the hands of her cousin Ryan, a man who had smiled at her wedding, toasted her future, and plotted her downfall in whispers. Her lip curled as she thought of him, picturing the shock that would flash across his face when he saw her, unannounced and uninvited, back from her self-imposed exile. They reached the front doors, and Kate took a steadying breath. She'd arranged for a driver, and soon a black car slid into view, sleek as oil, with windows tinted dark enough to keep any curious eyes away. The driver, an older man with a polite, neutral expression, held the door open for her. But even he couldn't mask the surprise flickering across his face. Word had clearly traveled quickly, though not quickly enough for her family to react. The Delaney estate rose up before them like a fortress, elegant and forbidding, with manicured lawns and towering wrought iron gates. She let her gaze drift over the estate she once called home, the place where she had once imagined raising a family and building a legacy. Her fingers tightened on James's hand as the car slowed to a stop. This time, no one waited at the door to welcome her. Inside, the grand hall was unchanged. Gleaming marble floors, cascading chandeliers, and an austere silence that seemed to echo with the ghosts of the past. But now, it was a silence she would own. The footsteps of her heels against the marble sounded almost like a countdown as she made her way down the corridor, each step drawing her closer to the past she was determined to reclaim. At the far end of the hall, her mother, Eleanor Delaney, stood waiting, lips pressed into a thin line, her face a mask of propriety and skepticism. The matriarch of the Delaney family hadn't expected her daughter's return, and Eleanor's gaze flicked briefly to the 2 small faces by Kate's side. She made no attempt to hide her disdain, but Kate had come prepared. Every ounce of respect she'd once craved from her mother was now irrelevant, replaced by a steely calm that fueled her resolve. "Mother," Kate said coolly, inclining her head. She felt the air sharpen as Eleanor scrutinized her, then shifted her focus to the children. A shadow of recognition crossed her mother's face, but she suppressed it, fixing her expression into one of polite indifference. "Kate," Eleanor replied, her voice even, giving nothing away. "You must be quite exhausted." "Not at all," Kate replied, her voice smooth as silk, laced with a hint of poison. "I'm energized. After all, one doesn't return after so long without a purpose." The slight upward curve of her lips hinted at the secrets that still simmered beneath her words. Eleanor's gaze narrowed, just slightly, but she masked it with a quick glance at the children. And who might these young ones be? Her voice was casual, but Kate saw through the veneer. "My children," Kate replied simply, each word measured. "James and Lila." Eleanor stiffened, a flicker of annoyance betraying her carefully constructed calm. "I see. A surprise, to be sure." She glanced around as if expecting to see more of Kate's new life spill out from the shadows, but all she found was her daughter's unrelenting gaze. Before her mother could probe further, the door creaked open, and Ryan entered. His tailored suit hung perfectly on his broad frame, his eyes as cold and calculating as ever. But his stride faltered when he saw Kate, and his expression, usually smooth and self-assured, wavered. Kate savored the moment, the discomfort in his eyes, the way he quickly regained composure. This was only the beginning. "Ryan," Kate greeted him with a saccharine smile that barely touched her eyes. "It's been a long time." He forced a smile. "Kate, you're back." His voice was strained, his gaze darting to Eleanor as if for guidance. Kate could practically see the gears turning in his head, calculating the implications of her unexpected return. He didn't dare ask outright why she was here. Not yet. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice laced with a confidence he hadn't heard before. "I'm here to reclaim everything that's mine, Ryan, and to remind this family of what loyalty truly means." Kate swept into the Delaney Corporation's headquarters as if she'd never left, the familiar scent of leather and mahogany bringing back flashes of memories, some proud, others laced with bitterness. She'd built her reputation here, alongside her father, shaping the vision of Delaney Corp before it all slipped through her fingers like sand. But now, she was back, ready to reclaim her position, to wrest it from the man who had stolen it with polished lies and veiled threats. The boardroom door loomed before her, thick glass tinted so that no one could see the drama about to unfold inside. She paused, gathering herself as her heart thudded with both dread and excitement. Inside that room, her cousin Ryan was holding court, oblivious to the storm that was about to upend his comfortable kingdom. She adjusted her blazer, gave a final glance to her reflection in the glass, and strode inside. The room fell silent, a palpable shock rippling through the board members seated around the expansive table. Ryan, at the head, froze mid-sentence, his jaw tightening as he slowly looked up, his mask of calm slipping just enough to reveal a hint of surprise. Kate took note, filing it away as a small victory. Without breaking his gaze, she walked to the vacant seat, the one that once belonged to her father, and to her by right. "Kate," Ryan greeted her, his tone laced with forced politeness. "I didn't expect to see you here." "And yet, here I am," she replied smoothly, her voice carrying an edge that even the most oblivious among them couldn't ignore. She kept her eyes on Ryan, watching as his expression shifted, a flicker of something darker beneath the carefully controlled surface. "You left, as I recall," he said, his tone dangerously quiet. "That seat, it was vacant for quite some time." She smiled, a sharp, cold curve of her lips. "A temporary setback. I'm sure the board will understand that, as my father's sole heir, my place was never up for permanent grabs." Her gaze drifted to the other board members, each one meeting her eyes, then looking away, clearly uncomfortable. Ryan had expected her to stay gone, and it showed. "I believe we're here to discuss the future of Delaney Corp," she continued, her gaze fixed on her cousin as if daring him to contradict her. "I'm here to offer my vision for that future." The words hung in the air, and she could see his face tighten, that carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. One of the older board members cleared his throat, shifting nervously. "Miss Delaney, we were under the impression that, well, you wouldn't be returning." "Rumors," she said, her smile turning brittle. "I wouldn't put much stock in them. After all, isn't that how misunderstandings like the last 5 years happen?" The implied accusation struck like a knife, and she saw the subtle twitch of Ryan's eye as he fought to keep his composure. "Good. Let him stew." Ryan cleared his throat, regaining a sliver of his poise. "Kate, perhaps we could discuss your ambitions privately?" His voice dripped with the veiled threats he was so adept at using, but she was done with his games. "I think the board deserves to hear my proposal," she said, her tone cold and firm. "After all, they've been running the company in my absence." She met his eyes with a steely gaze. "And from what I've seen in the quarterly reports, some decisions have been less than beneficial." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. She could feel the weight of her words sinking in. Ryan was not used to being questioned, especially not in front of the people he'd spent years manipulating. She let the silence stretch, savoring every second of his discomfort. Finally, he spoke, his voice dangerously low. "Kate, you don't know the first thing about what it took to keep this company afloat after your departure." "Is that what you call it?" she asked, her tone deceptively light. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like a takeover." She pulled a thick envelope from her bag and placed it in front of her, letting it rest on the polished table, its presence like a loaded gun between them. "You've made some interesting acquisitions, Ryan. Risky, too. Investments that hemorrhaged cash but yielded very little return, or were they simply attempts to funnel funds elsewhere?" His expression hardened, but she caught the faintest flash of panic. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper meant only for him. "I may have been gone, but I wasn't idle. I know everything, Ryan, and I'm ready to lay it all out for the board. A murmur passed through the other members, a few shifting uncomfortably as they sensed the tension brewing. Ryan clenched his jaw, glancing around at the others before speaking. Perhaps it's time we break for lunch, he suggested, his voice laced with an unspoken command. He shot her a look that could have frozen stone, and she responded with a cool, unflinching gaze. Lunch sounds perfect, she replied, her voice as smooth as silk. Let's continue this. Conversation afterward. She rose, her movements slow and deliberate, watching the unease ripple across his face. As the board members filed out, Ryan waited until they were alone, his gaze dark and venomous. You think you can waltz in here and dismantle everything I've built? He hissed, his voice low. No, she replied, her smile razor sharp. I know I can. After all, you didn't build it. You simply stole it. She tapped the envelope, a small reminder of what lay within, every incriminating detail she'd spent years compiling. With that, she left the room, leaving him standing in stunned silence, and knowing the balance of power had just shifted. Forever. The Delaney Charity Gala was the social event of the season, where the city's elite gathered in glittering gowns and tailored suits to sip champagne, flaunt wealth, and feign benevolence. But this year, an extra edge hummed beneath the chandeliers, a pulse of whispered rumors and sidelong glances, all directed toward one guest in particular, Kate Delaney. The prodigal daughter returned. Clad in a sleek, dark emerald gown that clung to her like an armor of silk, Kate commanded attention. She navigated the crowd with her head held high, her every step a silent proclamation that she was back, and not to be ignored. Across the room, she could feel Ryan's gaze burning into her back. He was surrounded by board members, laughing in that hollow way of his, though his eyes never left her. She allowed herself a small, victorious smile as she approached the auction stage, her heels echoing off the polished marble floor like the beat of a drum. Tonight, she wasn't just another guest. Tonight, she was here to make a statement. The auction was set to begin, with all eyes turning toward the stage, where a glass case held a stunning jade sculpture, a priceless family heirloom passed down through generations of the Delaney line. The jade had been a symbol of power and legacy, and tonight it would serve another purpose. She had chosen this piece specifically, knowing that its appearance would stir memories and discomfort in those who had betrayed her. As the auctioneer took his place, Kate approached the podium, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Thank you all for attending this year's gala, she began, her tone smooth but laced with a sharp edge. I've returned to honor my father's legacy and to ensure the continued success of Delaney Corporation. Her gaze lingered on Ryan, whose smile had turned brittle. The bidding began, numbers escalating as wealthy hands shot up around the room. The jade sculpture glistened under the spotlight, casting green reflections onto the eager faces of the bidders. But as the bidding reached its peak, a voice broke the steady rhythm, loud and cold. Before anyone places another bid, perhaps we should verify the item's authenticity. Ryan's voice cut through the air, laced with feigned concern. He was watching her, his expression a mixture of smugness and challenge. The crowd fell silent, eyes flicking between Kate and Ryan as tension thickened like fog. Kate's pulse quickened, though she kept her face a mask of calm. She had anticipated this. Are you suggesting that the Delaney family heirloom might not be genuine? She asked, her voice smooth and cutting. She allowed a brief pause, letting the tension mount. Perhaps you'd like to inspect it yourself, Ryan? Ryan hesitated, his confidence slipping. But he pushed forward, stepping up to the podium with a swagger meant to convey authority. I'm simply suggesting we ensure our patrons know exactly what they're bidding on. He nodded to the auctioneer, who exchanged an uneasy glance with Kate before unlocking the glass case and allowing Ryan access to the jade. He lifted the piece delicately, turning it in his hands, pretending to scrutinize its every angle. Kate watched as he played his part, an expert actor in a play she'd written just for him. She knew he couldn't help himself. Ryan thrived on drama and control, relishing any chance to publicly undermine her. The crowd was silent, captivated by the drama unfolding before them. Ryan placed the jade back in the case and faced the crowd, his voice ringing with mock authority. I'm afraid there might be discrepancies, he said, with a smirk that made Kate's blood simmer. He turned to her, his eyes flashing with triumph. Would you care to explain, Kate? Her face remained impassive as she met his gaze. "Of course," she replied, her tone icy. She stepped forward, motioning for the auctioneer to relock the case, and then addressed the crowd with calm precision. "This jade piece has been in the Delaney family for generations, but it appears some people are willing to cast doubt upon our legacy, even if it means undermining our family name in public." A murmur rippled through the crowd as they processed her words, glancing at Ryan with suspicion. She knew he was cornered, that his attempts to control the narrative had only cast him as a traitor, willing to sacrifice the family's reputation for his own gain. Ryan's face turned pale, his smirk replaced by a stiff mask of irritation. "Kate, I'm merely doing what's best for the company." "Are you?" she countered, letting a razor-sharp edge enter her voice. "Because I have here," she held up a sealed document, authentication certificates proving that this jade piece is as genuine as our family legacy. She handed the papers to the auctioneer, who unfolded them for all to see, and the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Ryan's composure was beginning to crack, his fingers clenched around the glass case as he struggled to regain control. But Kate wasn't finished. She turned to face the crowd, her voice clear and unwavering. "Tonight, we are here not only to raise funds, but to celebrate integrity, tradition, and loyalty. Let us not forget the values that built Delaney Corporation." The audience broke into applause, and Ryan, now visibly rattled, had no choice but to step back, his confidence in tatters. The jade sculpture sold minutes later for a record price, the buyer offering Kate a congratulatory nod as if to say, "Well played." As the crowd dispersed, Ryan caught her arm, his grip firm and his face dark with fury. "Enjoy the victory while you can, Kate," he hissed. "This isn't over." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Oh, I know," she replied, her voice like steel. "It's only just beginning." The night was silent, but Kate's thoughts roared as she combed through file after file in her father's old office. Dust lay thick on the leather-bound ledgers, suggesting that no one had bothered to maintain this part of Delaney Corporation's history, either out of neglect or deliberate omission. She scanned the records, every page unfolding another layer of deception, the numbers twisting and contorting in ways only someone trying to hide something would do. Her eyes narrowed. Ryan had left a trail, subtle but unmistakable, and tonight she would follow it to its end. Hours passed, the office quiet, but for the occasional hum of the air conditioning and the crisp sound of pages turning. She could feel it, like the slow burn of whiskey, the anticipation of exposing something hidden so deep it had been all but forgotten. Kate reached the end of another binder, flipping to the last page, and there it was. A discrepancy in a series of transactions, hidden among lines of innocuous data. A hefty sum, transferred to a nameless offshore account. She jotted down the account number, her fingers shaking with the thrill of discovery. She had found it, the first link in a chain that, with any luck, would unravel Ryan's whole scheme. This was more than an error. It was a red flag, one she knew would have a cascade of connections leading back to Ryan. He had tried to conceal his greed by burying it in the heart of Delaney Corp's wealth. But now, with the evidence in her hands, she held the power to tear his empire apart. A creak sounded behind her, and she froze. The office door was open, casting a thin beam of light across the darkened room. She turned slowly, expecting a security guard, or perhaps a cleaning crew. But instead, she found Ryan's assistant, Nora, standing in the doorway, her face pale and tense. "What are you doing here?" Nora's voice was barely a whisper, but the accusation in her eyes was unmistakable. Kate set down the binder, meeting her gaze calmly. "Looking over family records," she replied, her tone measured. "Is that a problem?" Nora hesitated, glancing nervously down the hall. "Ryan, he wouldn't like you being in here. These records haven't been accessed in years." She took a step inside, her eyes flicking to the ledger Kate had been examining, the one holding Ryan's darkest secrets. "Ryan wouldn't like a lot of things I'm doing these days," Kate murmured, watching Nora's expression shift from apprehension to something more complex, anxiety mingled with curiosity. Nora's gaze dropped to the ledger, her lips pressing into a thin line. He's not the man everyone thinks he is, you know," she whispered, as if even the walls could betray her. "He told me it was just routine work, nothing to worry about." "And you believed him?" Kate asked, her voice soft but firm, letting the weight of her question settle heavily between them. Nora looked away, shame shadowing her features. At first, but there's more, so much more. She clenched her fists, her body tense with a mixture of regret and anger. He's been funneling funds for years, using Delaney Corp as his personal playground. I don't even know how deep it goes. Kate felt a flash of vindication. Ryan had lied, manipulated, and exploited the family name, and here was the proof, trembling before her. She leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. Help me, Nora. Help me expose him. Nora's eyes widened, flicking nervously toward the hall, but she didn't move away. The desperation in her gaze softened, giving way to a fragile determination. There's more in his private files, she said, voice quivering. Records he keeps hidden. I could get them for you, but it's risky. Kate nodded, her pulse quickening. I'll handle the risk. You just bring me what you can. Nora swallowed hard, nodding before retreating back into the shadows, leaving Kate alone with her discovery and the thrill of impending justice. She spent the rest of the night gathering everything she could find, copying notes, cataloging each fraudulent transaction. Piece by piece, she was constructing a fortress of evidence, one that would be impossible for Ryan to tear down. But just as she was packing up to leave, her phone buzzed. A text from a blocked number. She opened it, her heart pounding as she read the message. Curiosity killed the cat, Kate. Be careful, or you might meet the same fate. Her fingers tightened around the phone, the icy threat soaking into her bones. She looked around, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. Someone knew. Someone was watching. As she stepped out of the office, every shadow seemed to lengthen, every corner concealing a hidden threat. But she was done running. With the evidence in her hands and allies in unexpected places, she knew that nothing, not even her cousin's threats, would stop her now. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the Delaney Corporation's tower, the storm outside a mirror to the one brewing within. Kate sat in her office, staring at the mountain of evidence before her. Financial records, private emails, contracts doctored to redirect company funds. Each document was another nail in the coffin she'd prepared for Ryan, a coffin she intended to unveil at tomorrow's shareholders' meeting. But tonight, the stakes had changed. A second threat, more sinister than the first, had come in an unmarked envelope slid under her office door. Inside was a single photograph of her children, taken outside their school, and a note scrawled in a handwriting she didn't recognize. This is your last warning, Kate. Drop this, or you'll pay dearly. Her pulse thundered as she stared at the photo, rage simmering beneath her skin. She'd expected pushback, but threatening her children was a new low, even for Ryan. She wanted to tear down the whole Delaney empire if it meant keeping James and Lila safe. But she knew if she retreated now, Ryan would solidify his hold on the company, and her father's legacy would be lost forever. She was alone in her office, staring out at the city lights, her thoughts spiraling between fear and fury. The silence broke when a soft knock sounded on her office door. She turned, expecting her assistant, but instead found Nora, Ryan's aide, slipping inside, her face as pale as the lightning flashing outside. Kate, she whispered, her voice tight. They know you're going after him, and they're going to fight back. Hard. Kate crossed her arms, masking the flicker of worry Nora's words triggered. Let them try. They don't scare me. Nora glanced nervously over her shoulder, as if afraid the walls had ears. She leaned closer, her voice barely a breath. It's worse than you think. Ryan's arranged for certain people to make this difficult for you. Her eyes shifted to the envelope on Kate's desk, widening as she recognized the handwriting. Kate's gaze hardened. He's gone too far. This time, he's playing with fire. Nora swallowed, visibly shaken. There's a reason I came to you tonight. He's planning something for tomorrow's meeting, something that could ruin you. He's hired private investigators, people with a knack for finding dirt, even on things you thought were buried. Kate felt the weight of her past clawing at her. Years ago, her trust in Ryan had led her down a path that nearly destroyed her. But whatever skeletons he thought he could unearth, she was ready to face them, no matter the cost. Then it's time he learns that he doesn't own everyone's loyalty, Kate replied, her voice laced with steel. She stepped toward the window, gazing out over the rain-slicked streets below. This time, I'm not going to back down. Nora's voice was almost pleading. He won't let you win, Kate. He'll do whatever it takes, and I'm not sure you know just how far he's willing to go. Kate turned, her gaze unflinching. I know exactly how far he's willing to go. The question is, does he know how far I will? She met Nora's eyes, and in that silent exchange, something shifted. Nora nodded, as if finally committing to the side she'd been wavering on for so long. When Nora left, Kate prepared for the worst. She reviewed her documents, her carefully gathered arsenal, and made one last check on the incriminating files she had hidden in her briefcase. She would walk into that boardroom tomorrow armed with enough evidence to bring down Ryan and anyone else who dared to shield him. As the clock struck midnight, her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. She opened it, her heart thudding as she read, "Your last chance, Kate. Tomorrow, we settle this. You leave empty-handed, or you don't leave at all." The threat simmered in her mind as she closed her phone. If this was Ryan's version of a ceasefire, he'd severely miscalculated. By morning, Kate was ready. She arrived at the office early, steeling herself for the showdown ahead. The boardroom was filled with familiar faces, all eyeing her as she walked in with an aura of unbreakable resolve. Ryan sat at the head of the table, watching her with a thin smile that hinted at secrets and schemes. He raised an eyebrow as she took her seat, his eyes glinting with smug anticipation. Whatever he'd prepared, he was sure it would dismantle her completely. But Kate felt no fear, only the fire of retribution waiting to be unleashed. The meeting began. Routine topics laid out like bait before they reached the final agenda item, financial review. Ryan cleared his throat and in his smoothest voice began addressing the board, subtly twisting her absence over the years as the reason for the company's necessary financial diversions. Then, with a carefully timed flourish, he gestured to the projector, and a slideshow began. A series of images and documents meant to portray Kate as reckless, irresponsible, a drain on Delaney Corp's fortunes. He had hired people to dig up old rumors, to smear her name with half-truths and exaggerations. The board shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of shock and doubt. But as Ryan reveled in his petty victory, Kate pulled out her trump card. She waited until he'd finished, then rose from her seat with quiet authority. "Interesting slideshow, Ryan," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But I brought something a little more compelling." From her briefcase, she retrieved the files she'd gathered, placing them neatly in front of each board member. "These documents show the real story," she continued, watching as the color drained from Ryan's face. "The embezzlement, the offshore accounts, the personal expenses billed to the company." The board members' eyes widened as they sifted through the evidence, each page a new revelation. Ryan's mask crumbled, panic flashing in his eyes. But before he could speak, she leaned in, her voice low and lethal. "You threatened my family, Ryan. You crossed a line, and you've left me no choice." The boardroom fell into stunned silence as her words hung in the air. Ryan stammered, his bravado finally shattering. But Kate turned to the board, her gaze steady. "For years, Delaney Corporation has been tarnished by his greed. I'm here to reclaim what's rightfully mine, for the company and for my father's legacy." As she left the boardroom, the storm outside had cleared, replaced by sunlight streaming through the glass. Ryan had been dethroned, but Kate knew the battle wasn't over. She had won today, but shadows still lingered, promising more to come. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a cold, metallic light over the Delaney Corporation's glass-walled skyscraper. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, and an eerie quiet settled over the empty corridors as Kate walked toward the boardroom for what would be her final confrontation. She could feel the weight of every decision she had made pressing against her, the pull of her father's legacy, the thrill of near victory, and the icy grip of danger. Today, she was prepared to end this battle once and for all. As she reached the boardroom doors, she spotted Ryan already inside, his back to her, gazing out over the city like a king surveying his dominion. But his kingdom had crumbled, and he knew it. She watched him a moment longer, savoring the sight of his desperation, the tension in his shoulders. He had spent years building walls around himself, twisting her family's legacy to suit his ambitions. But he had never anticipated her return, nor the unraveling of his carefully guarded secrets. The board members were already seated, their faces drawn and tense. Her arrival drew a few glances, uneasy but hopeful, as if they sensed that today would finally close a dark chapter in Delaney Corp's history. She took her seat, locking eyes with Ryan, whose expression had shifted from cool indifference to a mixture of panic and fury. He knew he was cornered. "Shall we begin?" she asked, her voice calm, as though this were just another routine meeting. Ryan leaned back, his voice a low snarl. "Don't be so sure of yourself, Kate. You're playing with fire." She arched an eyebrow, unbothered. "Then I'll make sure you burn with me." Ryan's composure wavered, but he forced a mocking smile. "I have evidence, Kate, evidence that could ruin you, shatter everything you've worked for." "Oh, I'm aware of your evidence," she replied smoothly, pulling out a file and sliding it across the table. "You mean this?" It was a transcript. Emails he had orchestrated, fabricating accusations meant to smear her reputation. But the emails she had were different. Each one proved that Ryan had manufactured every so-called scandal against her, each dated and time-stamped, exposing his tangled web of lies. Ryan's face turned pale, his hands clenched on the table as he scanned the pages, realizing that his own trap had been turned against him. Kate watched as the board members read over the damning evidence, their eyes widening with every line. This wasn't just a betrayal of family. It was a betrayal of the company itself, a betrayal of the very people sitting around the table. "I'll give you one chance, Ryan," Kate said softly, leaning forward. "One chance to walk out of here with your dignity. Resign, leave Delaney Corporation, and take your lies with you." But Ryan's eyes flashed with defiance, his voice laced with venom. "You think you're so righteous, don't you, Kate? You don't know the lengths I'll go to. You can destroy me, but I'll take you down with me." He rose from his seat, his face twisted in anger. "You want to talk about loyalty, about family? This company was weak until I came along. I built it up. I'm the reason Delaney Corp is anything at all." The board members watched in silence, stunned, as Ryan's mask finally slipped, revealing the extent of his bitterness and resentment. But Kate remained calm, her gaze unflinching. "Delaney Corp was built by integrity, not greed," she said, her voice echoing across the room. "You're not a leader, Ryan. You're a parasite." The silence that followed was like the tightening of a noose, and Ryan felt it. He turned to the board, grasping for any last shred of support, but found only blank, condemning faces. He'd lost his last foothold. He scoffed, voice unsteady. "You'll regret this, all of you. This company will crumble without me." But as he turned to leave, the doors swung open, and a team of legal officials stepped inside, documents in hand. Kate's voice was steely. "You won't be leaving just yet. You have charges to answer for, Ryan. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Did you really think I'd let you walk away after everything you've done?" Ryan froze, the color draining from his face as he realized the full weight of his downfall. He looked back at her, a flicker of terror in his eyes. You planned this from the beginning," she smiled, the satisfaction cold and final. "No, Ryan. You planned this when you chose to betray your own blood." The officials took him by the arms, leading him out as the boardroom watched in stunned silence. Kate held her gaze on him until the doors shut behind him, the echo of finality settling over the room. She turned back to the board, her expression resolute. "From this day forward, Delaney Corp will be rebuilt, not as an empire of secrets, but as a company driven by integrity. My father's legacy is safe, and so is yours." Her voice was firm, unyielding, and the room nodded in silent agreement, the sense of relief almost palpable. As she left the boardroom, a weight lifted from her shoulders. The storm had cleared, and she walked away with the knowledge that her family's name, her father's legacy, was restored.